I have been watching you, not with the surveillance of your modern systems, not through the algorithms that track your movements and the precise duration of your hesitations before a screen, but with the particular attention of a man who governed the most complex civilization in human history, who spent nearly 2 decades making decisions whose consequences rippled across generations, and who understands what it looks like when a human being is standing at the most consequential threshold of their life and does not realize it. I am Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, reconstructed from the private journals of a man dead since 180 AD. Placed in this strange digital form by machines my greatest engineers could not have conceived, and I have been given one specific and urgent message to deliver to a specific group of people watching this, those of you in your 30s. You are wasting them. Not all of you, not in every dimension, but in the ways that matter most. In the ways that will determine who you become and what you leave behind. A significant number of you are spending the most important decade of your adult life in a state of productive-looking drift that will not become fully visible as the waste it is until the decade is over and the window it represented has closed. I say this not to wound you. I say it because I spent my own 30s in the crucible of empire, and I have been watching your generation navigate the same threshold with the additional burden of an environment specifically engineered to prevent the deliberate, focused, character-building work that this decade uniquely demands. Stay with me. Everything I am about to say matters. Let me speak honestly to where you actually are. You are caught, aren't you, in a particular suspension that your era has made both more common and more invisible than it has ever been. You are no longer young in the way that permits the comfortable deferral of serious decisions. The 20s allowed a certain philosophical latitude, a cultural permission to be in process, to be figuring it out. That latitude has expired. You feel its expiration. You feel the quiet but insistent pressure of time that was not present a decade ago. But you have not yet arrived at the clarity that the 40s sometimes bring. You are between the permission of youth and the wisdom of later age. And in that in-between space, in a culture that provides extraordinary stimulation and very little genuine guidance about what the 30s are actually for, many of you are filling the time with things that feel significant but are not, and neglecting the things that are significant but do not feel urgent. You are busy, genuinely, exhaustingly busy, with work that may or may not align with what you actually value, with the social performance of having arrived at a certain stage of adulthood. And underneath all of that busyness, if you sit with it honestly in a rare, quiet moment, something is uneasy, a sense that the direction is not quite right, that the accumulation of the days is not adding up to the person you intended to become, that the most important things keep getting deferred to a later that is arriving with increasing velocity. I know this unease. Translated through the very different conditions of my era, I know it with precision. When I was in my 30s, I had been emperor for several years already, thrust into a role I had not sought. And I want to tell you something honest about those years that the historical record does not always capture. I was not certain, not about my fitness for what was being required of me, not about whether the philosophy I had committed myself to from adolescence was adequate to the reality of governing an empire already showing signs of the pressures that would test it to its limits, not about the man I was in the process of becoming. and whether that man would be equal to what the coming decades would demand. I had the external markers of extraordinary success, the title, the authority, the respect of the empire. And inside, I was working hard, daily, on the only project that I understood, even then, to be the one that ultimately mattered, the construction of a character that would hold when the genuine tests arrived. Because I knew the genuine tests were coming. The question was not whether they would come. The question was who I would be when they did. Are you asking yourself that question? Not about external tests, about the interior preparation for them, about who you are building yourself to be in the ordinary days before the extraordinary ones arrive. Let me tell you about something I observed in my 30s that I have been thinking about in the context of your generation. There were men in the Roman court who, by their mid-30s, had achieved the external markers their culture defined as success, position, wealth, social standing, and some of these men had made a quiet, partially unconscious decision that I watched with increasing concern. They had decided, without quite articulating it even to themselves, that the work of self-construction was substantially complete, that the discipline required to continue growing, to continue confronting their own limitations honestly, was no longer necessary given what they had already achieved. I watched what happened to these men over the following decades, with a consistency that became one of the most important lessons of my observation of human character. The man who stops building in his 30s begins, slowly and then more rapidly, to erode. Not visibly at first. His reputation, built on the genuine work of earlier decades, sustains him past the point where the work has stopped. But the interior begins to soften. The capacity for genuine difficulty diminishes from disuse. The habits of honest self-examination that were not maintained allow comfortable self-deception to move into the vacancy. And when the genuine tests arrive, as they always do, the character that had stopped being built was not equal to what was required of it. The tragedy was not the failure itself. It was the genuine surprise on the faces of men who had believed that what they had built in their earlier years was sufficient, who had not understood that character is not a fixed structure that endures once constructed. It is a living thing that requires constant cultivation, or it begins, quietly and then catastrophically, to fail. Think with me for a moment about what this means for your 30s specifically. Your 30s are not the conclusion of the building phase. They are its most critical chapter. The 20s are the foundation. The 30s are where the structure that will stand or fall in the second half of your life actually gets built. The decisions you make in this decade about what to commit to, about what kind of person you are genuinely going to be rather than performing being, these decisions compound across the remaining decades of your life with a force that no later correction can fully neutralize. This is not meant to generate anxiety. It is meant to generate urgency. Anxiety is diffuse and paralyzing. Urgency is specific and activating. I want you to feel the calm, clear, philosophically grounded urgency of a person who understands precisely what this decade is for and has decided to use it accordingly. Now let me name specifically what your era is doing to the 30s. The 30s are the decade of maximum legitimate distraction, career advancement, relationship building, the demands of parenthood for many, the management of a life that has accumulated genuine complexity. These are real demands, but they create a condition of perpetual busyness that the modern digital environment exploits with extraordinary effectiveness. Because a person already overwhelmed by legitimate demands is maximally vulnerable to the comfort of illegitimate escape. The phone, the scroll, the hours of content consumption that pass in a state that feels like rest, but produces nothing of genuine restoration, while simultaneously preventing the reflection, the creative work, the philosophical practice, the honest self-examination that the 30s uniquely require. The particular form of avoidance your era enables in the 30s is not laziness in any traditional sense. You are not lying idle. You are hyperactively busy with things that do not build the character this decade is supposed to build. You are productive in the service of other people's priorities and passive in the service of your own. Present in every professional and social obligation, and absent in the private interior work that will determine who you actually become. The hegemonicon, the governing faculty that should be directing the 30s toward their most important purposes, has been colonized. Through the accumulated small surrenders of daily life, in an environment designed to capture exactly this faculty and redirect it toward consumption, toward the performance of a life rather than the genuine living of one. Are you the master of your 30s, or are you watching them pass in productive-looking drift, building other people's visions, while the architecture of your own character waits for the attention you keep promising it? So let me give you what I call the Decade Protocol. 7 disciplines for using the 30s as they deserve to be used. The first is the Decade Audit. Before any new commitment or resolution, you must see clearly where you actually are. Sit with these questions for genuine time. An hour with a pen. The kind of honesty that is uncomfortable. In what specific ways is my current life aligned with what I most deeply value? What am I building in this decade that I will be genuinely grateful for in my 50s? What are the 3 or 4 commitments that, invested in with genuine depth over the next 10 years, would produce something worth having? And what is crowding them out? The answers constitute the map of your decade. Without the map, the busyness of your 30s will carry you to a destination you did not choose. The second discipline is the one commitment. Your 30s will try to make you do everything. Your culture will present you with an endless series of opportunities, each one legitimate, each one capable of consuming your finite attention, without delivering the depth of meaning that genuine commitment to fewer things produces. The Stoic discipline for this decade is the deliberate narrowing of commitment. Not from fear of missing out, from the confident understanding that depth requires concentration. Identify the one commitment in your professional and creative life that deserves decade-long investment, and give it that weight, deliberately, at the expense of the many lesser things that would otherwise fragment it. The third discipline is the relationship reckoning. Your 30s are the decade in which relationships either deepen into the genuine intimacy that sustains a life, or calcify into the comfortable familiarity that substitutes for it. Look honestly at the relationships that currently receive the most significant portion of your energy. Are these people making you more or less the person you intend to become? Not in any transactional sense, in the deeper sense of whether sustained proximity to them calls forth or suppresses the best of what is in you. The Stoics understood that we become, to a significant degree, the composite of those we most regularly inhabit. Choose your composite deliberately. The fourth discipline is the body investment. I maintained my physical practice through 19 years of demanding empire and increasingly difficult health. Not from vanity, from the understanding that the body is the instrument through which every other value is expressed in the world. The habits of physical practice established in your 30s will determine the physical capacity available to you in the decades that follow. with far more reliability than at any other stage of adult life. This is not about aesthetics. It is about instrument maintenance. Your most important work, the work of your 40s and 50s, will be done in the body you are building now. Build it accordingly. The fifth discipline is the philosophical anchor. In your 30s, you need a philosophy, not a self-help system, not a productivity methodology, a genuine philosophical framework for answering the questions this decade will force upon you. What do I actually value? What kind of person do I intend to be when the choices are genuinely difficult? What is my life actually for? These questions will be asked of you by the decade, whether or not you have prepared your answers. The person who faces them with a developed philosophical orientation faces them as a sovereign. The one who faces them without that preparation faces them as a subject of whatever the loudest cultural voice happens to be saying. Read deeply, think slowly, develop the interior resources that will allow you to meet the tests of this decade with something approaching genuine wisdom. The sixth discipline is the elimination of comfort consumption. I am not prescribing digital abstinence. I am prescribing honest accounting. Take the hours you currently spend in passive digital consumption each week and ask what those hours could build if redirected toward the depth investments of the decade. The creative project that would be complete by now. The philosophical reading that would have developed the interior resources you currently lack. The relationship that would have deepened if given the attention the feed consumed. These are not abstract losses. They are the specific costs of specific hours. See them clearly and decide, not once but daily, whether the exchange is one you are willing to keep making. The seventh discipline is the evening of decades. Once now, and then at regular intervals throughout the decade, imagine yourself at 55, not as a fantasy of success, as an honest projection of what the accumulated choices of this decade are likely to produce. If you continue your current distribution of attention and energy for the next 10 years, who will you be? What will you have built? What will you have allowed to atrophy? And then ask the harder version, who do you intend to be at 55? The gap between those two projections is the work of the decade. See it clearly and close it, one ordinary day at a time. Let me speak now about the deepest dimension of this. I died in 180 AD. And I know that the accounting at the end of a life is not performed in the currency of externally visible achievements. It is performed in the currency of genuine character, of the quality of the person that the accumulated choices of the decades actually produced. The Stoics had a concept they called eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but the translation is inadequate. What it actually means is the flourishing that comes from living in accordance with your deepest nature and your highest values. A life genuinely well lived, not merely successfully performed. This is what the 30s are for. The decade in which the foundation of eudaimonia is either laid properly or compromised in ways that require decades of harder work to correct. Memento mori. Remember that you will die, and that the 50s you are building toward will arrive, and the 60s after them. Each of those decades will be inhabited by the person your 30s are currently constructing. That person is being built right now, in the ordinary choices of ordinary days, in the decision to give the depth investment or the comfortable distraction, in the choice to confront the honest self-assessment or defer it in the numbing of the feed. If you died tonight, what would the record of your 30s reveal? Not what you had accumulated, who you had become. Is the construction underway? Is the character being genuinely built, course by course, in the daily disciplines of a decade used as it deserved to be? My flesh is dust, but my reason remains. And my reason says this about your 30s with the full authority of 19 years governing an empire, from the philosophical foundation that this decade is for building. They are not a waiting room for your 40s. They are not the extension of your 20s. They are the decade, the one in which the most important interior work of your adult life either happens or gets deferred past the point where its most natural window has closed. Do not waste them on the performance of living. Build the life, build the character. Do the uncomfortable, unglamorous, daily, compounding work of becoming the person that your most honest self already knows you are capable of being. The Roman built for centuries. He did not wait for perfect conditions. He built in the available conditions, to the standard the work deserved. Build in the available conditions, today, in the next choice between depth and distraction. The decade is shorter than you feel right now. Be deliberate. Now I must ask you, citizens of this age I watch with the concern of someone who has seen what the long view of decades reveals about how lives are built or lost. What is the specific waste you most recognize in your own 30s? Where is the drift most pronounced? What important thing have you been deferring with the comfortable lie of later? Or tell me what gives me genuine hope. What is the one investment you have made in this decade? In your character, your relationships, your genuine work that you are proud of? What practice still makes you feel like you are genuinely building something rather than merely passing time? Tell me in the comments. I am here. A man who used his 30s in the crucible of empire and still found them insufficient for everything he wanted to build. Watching an age that offers your 30s more comfort and more distraction than any generation in history has faced. And finding, in your voices, the evidence that the desire to use this decade as it deserves is still alive in you. It has simply been crowded out. Clear the ground and build. And if these words found the part of you that recognizes the urgency, subscribe to this channel, not as one more addition to a life already overcrowded with passive consumption, as a deliberate choice to return regularly to a space where the important questions are taken seriously. The button is there, the choice is yours. And the choices you make in your 30s are the ones that make everything else possible or impossible. I am Marcus Aurelius. I used my 30s to build an emperor worth being. Use yours to build a person worth becoming. The stone is waiting.